Today we are setting out on an epic adventure to climb to the absolute highest point in the Netherlands. To achieve this heroic feat, we will need to travel over 2 hours by train from Amsterdam to the border town of Heerlen, then continue on bicycle for a grueling 22 kilometers uphill until we finally reach Valselberg, the highest point in the Netherlands at a whopping 322.4 meters above sea level. It's going to be a long journey, so let's get started. Almost there. We did it, chat. We made it to the highest point in the Netherlands. Woo-hoo-hoo! But wait, why isn't this video over? The Netherlands is a small country in Europe, but for several centuries, the Dutch had colonies around the world, including the Caribbean, especially after the Dutch West India Company was founded in 1621, which was the same year that the Netherlands declared war on Spain. And so the Dutch West India Company pretty much immediately started plundering Spanish ships in the Caribbean, as well as conquering Spanish islands such as Curaçao, which became one of the largest distribution hubs of slaves from Africa. After several centuries of history I feel nowhere near qualified to talk about because this is not a history channel, the Dutch ended up owning several islands in the Caribbean that were collectively referred to as the Netherlands Antilles. These islands were not technically part of the Netherlands, but they were considered a constituent country in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Technically, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are also constituent countries of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but they're a lot more integrated than the Netherlands Antilles was to the rest of the Netherlands. But regardless, there were many people who were very unhappy about this situation, especially on Aruba, which became an independent constituent country in 1986. This ultimately resulted in referendums across the other islands, and in October of 2010, the Netherlands Antilles was officially dissolved. Curaçao and Sint Maarten voted to become independent constituent countries like Aruba, while Bonaire, Statia, and Saba voted to become part of the Netherlands. As a result, these last 3 islands are no longer constituent countries, they are now part of the Netherlands. The legal term is openbare lichamen, or public bodies, which is exactly the same legal classification that this chunk of reclaimed land had before it became the province of Flevoland. And I'm telling you all of this because it means that the highest point in the Netherlands is not this 322.4 meter hill. It's the 870-meter-high Mount Scenery on the island of Saba, which you can hike to from here. So let's get started, and I'll tell you about Saba on the way. Saba is an island in the Caribbean located right about here. The entire island is only 13 square kilometers in size, and just over 2,000 people live here, which makes Saba the smallest territory in the Americas by population. Incidentally, whenever I've heard someone in the Netherlands, that is the mainland Netherlands, speaking about the island, they call it Saba. But everyone I spoke to on the island called it Saba, so that's what I'll call it. In case you're ever confused, just remember it rhymes with Sega. We were staying in Windward side, the second largest town in Saba, and you will be shocked to learn that it is located on the windward side of the island. But most importantly, the trailhead to the Mount Scenery hike is located right at the edge of town. Most of the hike up Mount Scenery is on steps like these. There are apparently 1,064 steps, but I didn't count them, so I might be guilty of spreading misinformation on the internet. Oh, and I noticed that this cottage located a short way up the hiking path is currently for sale. The asking price is $525,000 US dollars. Contact Jeff if you're interested. Despite being part of the Netherlands, the official currency of Saba is the US dollar. They used to use the Netherlands Antillean guilder, but after the Netherlands Antilles was dissolved in 2010, that currency couldn't be minted anymore. Since the exchange rate of the Antillean guilder was already pegged to the US dollar and the economy of all of the islands depended a lot on American tourism, the easiest thing to do was to just use the US dollar until a better solution could be found. Curaçao and St. Martin developed a new currency called the Caribbean guilder, which was introduced in 2025. But Saba and the other islands switched to the US dollar and have never adopted anything else. By contrast, the French side of nearby Saint Martin uses euros. This small stone structure along the hike is kind of interesting. It reminds me of the one we found in the forest in the first episode of Day Pass. The path splits off into multiple different hiking trails here. We're going to the right, though, to the top of Mount Scenery. Now the hiking trail runs along this road for a while. You could start hiking from here if you really wanted to, but it doesn't really save you much time and it kind of spoils the fun of walking from town. The main road around Saba is very steep and winding, and the story of how this road was built has become a foundational story on the island. Before the road, people would get between towns by walking up stone steps, carrying heavy items by donkey, and development on Saba was far behind the rest of the Netherlands Antilles as a result. So there was a strong desire to build a road, but when Dutch engineers were brought to the island in the 1930s, they said that it would be impossible to build a road here, presumably because the elevation was higher than 322.4 meters. One Saba resident, named Josephus Lambert Hassel, known in the island as Lambie, was not satisfied with this answer. So he signed up for a correspondence course by mail and taught himself engineering. Then he and dozens of other Saba residents all got together to build the road themselves, and I love the photo of how they delivered the first motor vehicle to the island. Sabans now refer to this as the road that could not be built, and there's a sign explaining this on the side of Lambie's house, which was recently converted into a cafe. Well, that's the story anyway, and it's mostly correct, but the truth is a little bit more nuanced. This road to the harbor was engineered by the Department of Public Works on Curaçao, and it's not so much that the Dutch engineers said that building the rest of the road would be literally impossible, so much as it would be extremely difficult and prohibitively expensive, and most importantly, that the government wasn't willing to pay for it. But Lambie and his fellow Sabans did genuinely design and build the other roads on the island by themselves and without any machinery, which is incredibly impressive and deserving of legend. As for the road along the hiking path, it just goes by some public gardens, as well as these greenhouses. This is called Gezondheid Farms, which is what I would expect from Saba, one Dutch word, one English word. Saba is a strange mix of American influence and Dutch influence. Children learn both languages at school, but English is by far the dominant language on the island. About a third of the population speaks Dutch, but nearly everyone speaks English. We stayed at the Cottage Club Hotel in Windward side that had some great views of the mountain and the sea, and you can tell that they're Dutch because the brickwork of the clinkers is really well done. Windward side is fairly small and everything was within easy walking distance, which was nice. There were several shops and restaurants, a playground, and 2 grocery stores that were surprisingly well stocked. The grocery store was funny because the shelves had many products commonly found in Dutch grocery stores, mixed in with the rest of the items from North America. So of course, I had to pick up some Nederlandse troep. It was also weird to be on an English-speaking island in the Caribbean and see very Dutch-looking police and fire vehicles. After leaving the greenhouses, the path continues and there are no more buildings until the top. The number of different kinds of trees and vegetation along this path is amazing. If I knew anything about it, I would tell you something about it here, but I don't, so I won't. The hike up to Mount Scenery is not particularly difficult, but it is tiring. And I preferred climbing the parts that were just a steady ramp up than the parts with stairs, although I find it very difficult to complain at all about a hike like this when I know that somebody once had to climb up this hill and build the stairs as they went. These stairs might look like they've been here for centuries, but they were actually apparently only built in the late 1960s. Oh, nice, a bus shelter. I'll take transit the rest of the way up. Unfortunately, Saba is very car dependent. A public transit route was launched in 2024, but it is only available to residents of Saba, and I'm assuming that this bizarre schedule would make sense to you only if you actually lived here. Of course, the towns are very small, and you can easily walk to where you're going in just a few minutes. To get between towns, we mostly took taxis, which sounds fine, but in reality, it was a giant pain in the ass. There aren't a lot of taxi drivers on Saba, so whenever a flight would come in, most of them would be busy with airport pickups. So there were a few times where I couldn't book a taxi to get where I wanted to go, like when I needed to make it to my scheduled boat trip so that I could film the island from a distance. So I had to walk along the road, which really sucked. There's no sidewalk, and some people drive really fast. This was definitely the worst part about staying on Saba. But this car dependency is typical of most islands in the Caribbean. A few years ago, I made a video about Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, and I talked about how bad the traffic was, despite being on an island that's smaller than the city of Amsterdam. We also visited the nearby island of St. Maarten, and the traffic there was absolutely ridiculous, especially given the population. And some of the walks I did there were so bad, it made me wish I was back in Houston. As I always say, there's no solution to car traffic except viable alternatives to driving, and since these islands don't have any viable alternatives, everybody drives. Saba has less than a tenth of the population of the Bahamas, so the traffic was nowhere near as bad, but I did find it annoying that there was an almost constant flow of cars through the middle of Windward side on weekdays. But at least they had speed bumps to keep people from driving too quickly through the town. So what Saba really needs to do is to stop talking to those Dutch engineers and get some Swiss engineers in here to build some trains, trams, and funiculars. I'm sure you can get some EU funds to pay for all that, right? I was pleased, though, to see that the cars in Saba were mostly small cars. It was nice to see that the disease of oversized SUVs hasn't infected the island yet. It was also interesting to see that the license plates were Saban and not Dutch. For example, cars on the French side of St. Maarten do have EU license plates. I saw many small pickup trucks like these, which are very similar to the K-trucks that are common in Japan, and some of them even had right-hand drive and were likely imported from Japan. I saw some larger pickup trucks as well, but amazingly, people were actually using them for their intended purpose of hauling things, which is pretty rare to see these days. In most other countries, pickup trucks are primarily driven empty by insecure assholes, especially in the rest of the Netherlands. And the cars were pretty beat up and well used too. I assume it's difficult to get a car repaired or replaced on an island like this. I didn't see anybody riding a bicycle on Saba, which isn't too surprising as everything in town is easily accessible on foot and the hills are quite steep. But I wouldn't even want to ride an e-bike here because the road is not very safe for cycling. I would love to see what an island like this would be like with proper, safe Dutch-style road design, but we all know that's not going to happen. At this point in the climb, we're entering the cloud forest. As humid air is forced upward by the steep slope of the mountain, the water condenses, and so the top of Mount Scenery is almost always covered by clouds. Here is one of the rare times I managed to catch it when it was clear. But there is a great view of the bottom from up here if you can catch a break in the clouds. The bottom is the largest town on Saba, but it's still not a very big town and you can easily walk from one end to the other. Despite its name, the bottom is actually not at the bottom of the island. It was originally called the Botta by Dutch colonists, which means the bowl, because its location is like a bowl between the mountains, which makes more sense. We were there during their King's Day celebration, where they opened one street to people and lined it with tents. It was funny to see people celebrating Dutch King's Day while barbecuing and listening to Caribbean music. Saba is an interesting place. Sometimes it feels American, sometimes it feels Caribbean, and sometimes it feels Dutch. And the banks are Canadian. Whew, this is a good time to stop for some water. This hiking trail is in Mount Scenery Nature Park, which became an official Dutch national park in 2019. The mountain we are climbing is a dormant volcano. The last eruption happened shortly before the first European settlements in the early 1600s, but it could become active again. Because this island is effectively a volcano, Saba doesn't have the sandy beaches found on the other islands in the Caribbean. The coastline is mostly rocky cliffs over 100 meters tall. This made the island a favorite hideout for pirates in the 1600s. Like most tourists, we arrived in Saba by airplane, and this photo I took through the cockpit window makes it look like we're flying straight into a mountain. The airport on Saba has the shortest commercial runway in the world at only 400 meters long, and it immediately drops off a cliff and into the sea at the end, which limits what type of planes can land on Saba. It's mostly serviced by Twin Otter propeller planes made by the Canadian company de Havilland. These type of planes are designed for use in extreme environments. This one literally has skis on it and flies to Antarctica. How freaking cool is that? We arrived by plane and the landing was, quick. It would have been fun to fly out of Saba too, but we left by ferry, which was fine. There was lots of space and it didn't rock around too much, but if you do need them, the barf bags were much fancier than what you find on a typical airplane. The ferry was on time and the trip took about an hour and 15 minutes to get to St. Martin. The airport on St. Martin is famous as well, but for totally different reasons. Outside of the airport on Saba is this solar farm that was completed in 2019, and the solar panels were designed to withstand a Category 4 hurricane. There are 2 solar parks with batteries on Saba that provide 40% of the island's electricity, with the rest being generated mostly by diesel generators. Saba Electric has more solar parks under construction and plans to stop using fossil fuels entirely by 2030. As you might expect, tourism is the largest sector of the Saban economy, but mass tourism has not yet come to Saba, which is why the island is referred to as the unspoiled queen of the Caribbean. Apparently there are some great diving locations here too, though I didn't get a chance to do any diving as I mostly just came here to hike up this mountain for your entertainment. Once we get into the cloud forest, the steps start getting a little bit steeper. Finally, a railing. I guess this part of the hike complies with EU safety standards. But seriously, the railing, while not really necessary, does make the stairs a little less of a chore. After a lot more stairs, we finally get to this bench, and it's possible to see the communications tower at the top of Mount Scenery for the first time. This tower was originally built in the 1970s as a microwave relay station to nearby islands, but it was aging and needed to be replaced. So a few weeks before we arrived, the Dutch Ministry of Defense started a project to replace the tower, which we only learned about after arriving on the island. The project involves dismantling the tower by workers who have to make this climb every morning, and then a helicopter is used to pick up the pieces of the tower and deliver them to this ship moored offshore. This is quite a complicated operation, and it's complicated further by the fact that the helicopter pilot needs to see what he's doing, so we would occasionally see them quickly fly up to the top of the mountain whenever there was a break in the clouds. And apparently that's happening right now, because here comes the helicopter. This is a Sikorsky S-64F sky crane, and they're really interesting machines, so it's great to see one of them up close. Each one of these helicopters is given a unique name. This one is called Camille, and it was built in 1970. The sky crane named Olga was used in the construction of the CN Tower in Toronto in 1975. I love helicopters, and I wanted to become a helicopter pilot when I was young, but it's horrendously expensive to get a helicopter pilot's license, so I only ever took one trial lesson. Back on Saba, the helicopter makes it to the tower, but the clouds roll in again. It looks like they might be trying to push away the clouds with the helicopter blades, but it's not working. And after a few minutes of trying, they abort and head back to the airport. And once again, it's quiet on the hiking trail. The path now goes downhill, but there's a sign here showing that it's this way to the highest point, so let's go. The ground here is really slippery, so I'm glad there's a railing, but once we get to the bottom, there's a sign saying that the path is closed and workers are turning back people if they go through. We heard that the wind from the helicopter had knocked down some trees and it was unsafe to go along this route while the helicopter was operating. There is another hiking trail here called the Elfin Forest Trail, which looks nice, but we're trying to get to the top, so let's turn around and head back up the hill to take the alternate route. The first part of this trail has muddy wooden stairs with some wire mesh on them to make them slightly less slippery, but you really have to watch your step. But then we get to this part, which is just a path of wet mud with some boards dropped down to make it slightly easier to walk on, and it just gets worse from here. There are a few sections along the way that require some climbing, but it's not too difficult, and some parts have ropes to help. And finally, after one more flight of wooden stairs, we make it to the peak. There's a concrete post here to mark the highest point, and if you wait for a break in the clouds, you can get a fantastic view from up here. I knew the islands in this region were close together, but it still surprised me how easy it was to see one island from another. This is Saba as seen from the shores of St. Martin, and this is Statia as seen from Saba. But back up on the peak, you can see the tower that they're dismantling, and if you look really carefully to the left of that, just over there, you can see the actual highest point in the Netherlands that we can't get to because of the helicopter. Damn it! Clearly, I'm going to have to come back to Saba and try it again sometime. Of course, that next trip would be a lot easier if they at least had some public transit. But one thing that did make my trip easy was having reliable mobile phone service, which is why I was glad to have Saley, the sponsor of this video. Saley lets you buy an affordable data plan on your phone so you can save money on expensive roaming fees. I find it an absolute necessity to have a good data connection on my phone when I travel, in case I need to maybe text someone for help when I slip and fall while hiking. Back in the olden days, I used to have to find a local shop and buy a pay-as-you-go SIM card, which wasn't always easy in a new country. But with Saley, you just choose your plan and install your eSIM in the app before you leave, and a few minutes after you arrive, your eSIM automatically activates and you've got a high-speed data connection. Saley offers affordable eSIM plans for over 160 countries as well as 8 different regions. This was incredibly convenient for my trip because Saley had a single eSIM package for the Caribbean, which included Saba as well as all of the other islands I visited, which was great because if I had to get a different SIM for each island, it would have been much more expensive. Saley lets you choose how much data you want to buy so you can choose the right amount for the length of your trip. And I also like that I only have to install the Saley eSIM once and it works for every country, which is going to be incredibly useful next month when I'm filming 6 new episodes of Day Pass across multiple countries in Asia. I can tell you from experience that having a reliable and fast internet connection makes traveling so much easier. So if you're planning to travel, I strongly recommend you try out Saley. Just follow the link below to download the Saley app and use the code NotJustBikes at checkout to get 15% off a Saley eSIM data plan. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to Saley for sponsoring this video.